This is the CreaseCast.
All right, folks, welcome to what is going to be a very bizarre, hot and cold episode of the CreaseCast. I am your host today, Cody Siebertson. Not with me today is Lachlan Irvine, who is returning to San Jose to sort out some green card issues. He hopped the border earlier today and is currently walking back to San Jose to get his paperwork in order. We miss him dearly here at the CreaseCast, and we wish him well on this summer journey that he is about to embark on. Sucks to be him because the hot of this episode is pretty unreal. And I know he's probably going to be kicking himself that he doesn't get to talk about probably what's going to be the only thing worth talking about in social media, in writing, in hockey Twitter, everywhere on the planet. It is the Leafs screwing up a 3-1 series lead against the Montreal Canadiens and losing a Game 7, their fourth straight Game 7 elimination, this time to the Montreal Canadiens. It wasn't even close. They looked like they were playing defense the entire night, trying to defend a 1-goal lead for pretty much 60 minutes, even when it was 3-0 in the third and they really, or 2-0 in the third, they needed to generate something. It looked like they were playing keep away to try and prevent them from making it 3-0 as like some kind of like emotional kick up or something. I don't know. It was very bizarre. But to all those that were waiting for this, like, this was a great day. Monday, was it May 31st or whatever it is? A day that will go down in history for Canadian Canucks fans, Leafs fans. Well, it'll be a day of infamy. Lots to talk about and to really get into for this game, because you couldn't really chalk it up to being a goaltending problem, even though the score would indicate it being a 3-0 game. But Jack Campbell was fine, despite the fact that the goal he allowed on Brendan Gallagher might have been the ugliest one of the playoffs. And that's saying something, because Sergei Bobrovsky started a couple games for Florida and looked like he just wanted to go officiate a wedding or something. He just could not care less. But that Gallagher shot, I just felt so bad for Jack Campbell, because everyone knows, like, he's a former first rounder, took a long time to make it to the NHL, finally gets his shot and goes on this like Cinderella run with the Leafs and like really starts putting it together. He has like a 10-game win streak as a starter or something. It's like a Leafs record. And, you know, he's trying his best, but like there's only so much he can do as a goaltender. He finished the series with the highest save percentage by a Leaf goalie in the playoffs since Johnny Bower in 63-64. Like, that's insane. That is absolutely insane. He had like a 935 save percentage and lost the series in Game 7. And that is completely not on him. His teammates completely blew it. They let him down. And it wasn't just the depth issues. Like, I mean, you take away their number 1C and John Tavares due to injury. You take away Jake Muzzin. Like, yeah, they're going to struggle. But fortunately for a team like Toronto, they have a very, very talented top six. A top six that includes Austin Matthews, the Art Ross winner, the Rocket Richard Trophy winner, and Mitch Marner, who may have had his worst playoff series to date. And I mean, the Leafs can't really do anything if they can't put a goal past Carey Price. Price played very, very well. He was, 946 save percentage, pretty much didn't let anything on him, even though the chances that they really faced in Game 7 were pretty much next to nothing. And the one goal that he did allow from Nylander was like screened by like 8 players. Like, so, I mean, you can't really fault him for that. I'm sure he would have wanted the shutout, but it's Carey Price. He'll survive. He'll move on. He was pretty nonchalant about it in his post-game availability, where he was just like, yeah, whatever, another day in the office, which is kind of really funny because he's so stoic and stuff. And you see him not caring whatsoever, that they just like mounted this incredible 3 straight wins to stave off elimination. Corey Perry gets some goals. Tyler Toffoli, Vancouver Canucks legend, Tyler Toffoli scores the empty netter to seal it. The dagger. It really sucked seeing that because it was like, they weren't even trying for their goalie or like for their own personal pride to try and make it like, like a 2-goal or like a 1-goal lead. Like they got the Nylander goal and it was just like, they didn't even try to like mount offense like rapidly. They were just checked the fuck out. So like, I mean, at least when the Canucks were facing Vegas in the bubble and it was game 7, they were just getting shelled all series. Like, I mean, they held their own. It wasn't great, but like, they were trying. They had that gorgeous Besser chance that of course went nowhere, but the Leafs, like, they just didn't care. They didn't try. I loved how many texts and messages and from people that I know, friends, family, that were just like, the fucking Leafs. And it's really funny. Like it sucks in one sense because, like, as I said on this program multiple times, I was really hoping for the Leafs to actually go through because I admire the kind of, the full tank rebuild that they engaged in to try and kickstart something fresh. They locked in their stars early with mega contracts, and then they tried to round it out with depth pieces, and they've really been trying to find that right mix. And it seemed like they kind of got away from the more numbers-based approach in their last offseason, this season when they, went for Nick Foligno, they went for Joe Thornton, they went for Wayne Simmons. Like it was just kind of like a shotgun approach of let's see anyone and everyone we can get on cheap hometown discounts so that they might provide, the veteran grit leadership that we're looking for our young group. Unfortunately, the depth wasn't really a problem. Like Jason Spezza, like played really well for an elderly man. Alex Kerfoot on the third line, who was picked up for Nazem Kadri, played really good, all things considered. I mean, the all things considered being they didn't score and they didn't seem to have anything going for them whatsoever in Game 7. But when your depth comes in and it's like, the Jason Spetzes of the world making up for, Joe Thornton looking very old and pretty much making your power play, your first unit power play look completely ineffective because you got old Joe, who's, awesome and like had a fantastic NHL career, but putting him on power play 1 at his age in a do or die Game 7 doesn't really seem like the most optimal usage of him. So yeah, sucks to be Jack Campbell, sucks to be Leafs fans. And it really, it's a shame because, of course you go on Twitter after the fact or, Reddit, everyone's like, blow the team up. Team sucks. Marner is garbage. Not a playoff performer. Can't do anything right. Analytics is stupid. This is why you trust the old wise hockey man. And all I can say to that is, as a fan of the Winnipeg Jets, patience rules. I can't tell you how many times I've read over the years after playoff series, Nick Ehlers, he can't score. Nick Ehlers, he's not a playoff performer. He sucks. And last year, he finally breaks that hump. He gets a playoff goal. The Jets had no business, in the bubble. It didn't really matter. And then this season, both regular season and playoffs, Nick Ehlers comes alive and is like one of the best wingers in the Canadian division. Like, I've been saying for a long time on Twitter, like, if Nick Ehlers was any other market, he would be like a complete star just because of the way he plays. He's unbelievable. And people in the Winnipeg market wanted him gone because he couldn't score goals in the one playoff series where they made some miraculous run, getting to the conference finals against Vegas and then losing because they were completely gassed, had nothing left in the tank after a hard-fought and exhausting series against Nashville. Look at the patient approach that worked there. I don't think they're gonna. I mean, they might trade Marner. If they trade Marner, that would be. I mean, it would be so short sighted. I don't know who's taking on that contract right now, especially if the old hockey men are going, Marner's not a playoff guy. Why would I want him on my team? But he's like still really good. He's unreal in the regular season. He just hasn't really found his form in the playoffs yet. If they traded him though, like, could you imagine? I mean, the magnifying glass might actually be off Canucks for once, because the Leafs implosion that would happen if they traded Marner to Buffalo or Detroit or whatever, like wherever he went, if he was traded, the return would never be viewed as good enough. It will be decried, reasonably so, until the end of time. It won't matter. People will be so pissed. It'd be kind of like that. It'd be like a meme where it's just like you wanted something for so long, and then it finally happens, and then when it finally happens, everyone's pissed off at you for it. So you're just like shaking your head, holding your fingers to your temple. So yeah, as a proponent of Team Chaos, I'm a big fan of trade Mitchell Marner, even though I really hope they don't. I hope they just kind of stick with their current process. They have the right idea of like trying to find a match of, analytics-based approach, guys who can control play, guys who, have good expected goals for, while also being veterans of the league who've played here for a long time and, find a way in playoffs to make it done, provide leadership, all that. Basically the anti-Canucks who just kind of go for whoever's been in the league the longest and whoever has a cup ring, like the Jay Beagles of the world, just like, oh, he won a cup. That must mean, he's very good in the room and a leadership guy. You can't evaluate players just because they were on a winning team with better players on it. You should be going for the better players and making yourself a better team. But I mean, that's a topic we've revisited way too many times on this program, because Canucks kind of are like Matthew McConaughey in True Detective. Time is a flat circle. As we talked about this in one of our last episodes, that the assertion that the team was going to be aggressive in the offseason, and I'm using air quotes in this instance because their versions of being aggressive are terrifying and usually bad. So it would be very funny to see, Kyle Dubas being aggressive for his team to take another stab with this core, to go for the playoffs and, going big game hunting with what he's got. And then, the Canucks being aggressive and going big game hunting and ending up with like, some 32-year-old defenseman for the right side because they couldn't re-sign Travis Hamonic to a deal that made sense. But we're not gonna. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say we. Lachlan isn't even here. Like, this is my show. I can do whatever the fuck I want. Lachlan isn't here. I'm gonna swear as much as possible because I know he doesn't like it. It's really funny. But the whole offseason thing for the Leafs and Canucks are just kind of like intertwined, and it'll be so awkward to see what kind of happens with both teams. I would really laugh if the solution to Toronto's problems is to offload like Alex Kerfoot and Jake Muzzin or whatever, and they offload them to the Canucks in exchange for JT Miller and Nate Schmidt, and then both teams end up like not making the playoffs next season, or both making it and they end up in a first round series because border restrictions or whatever. Which I haven't seen anyone like talking about this, but the current BC reopening plan is to get things basically back to normal by September, with everyone having their second dose, and then I think they'll start easing up border restrictions for like casual travel. But that's September. That's like a month before training camp's supposed to open, or is the month that training camp opens. But like Alberta doesn't have that plan yet. Manitoba does not have that game plan yet. So can they engage in cross-border travel for all the Canadian teams if half the provinces are still struggling with controlling their COVID outbreaks? Like, I don't know how that's necessarily going to work. Like we could be looking at year 2 of an all Canadian division, which, you know, I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, it is if you when you look at like what Colorado's doing to Vegas right now in the playoffs, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, the best teams that the Canadian division could offer blew it in the 7th round and got swept to 2 teams, those teams being the Habs and the Jets, who basically tripped and stumbled their entire way to playoff contention. The only reason that the Jets and the Habs are in the playoffs is because they got off to a good start, and the 3 teams below them, Vancouver, Calgary, and Ottawa, were fucking awful. That's the only reason that they're in, basically. And Montreal somehow has upset the number 1 seed. Winnipeg has upset the number 2 seed, and now you have 2 teams that are probably going to provide the most boring hockey imaginable, battling to fight or to take on Colorado. That is so sad that this entire North Division battle is just going to culminate in Colorado winning 4 games straight by like a lopsided score or total goals scored of like 48-6. Maybe like, and 6 is being generous. Like 48 is probably selling it too low. They're going to be like 10-goal games every single game. Like what they did to Vegas the other day on Sunday with 7-1 or 7-1 game, just a complete destruction. I don't quite understand what Pete DeBoer was thinking putting in Robin Lehner. Maybe he's just trying to get a read on the Avs gameplay and wanted to give Fleury a rest so he could get a read on everyone's habits or whatever. But obviously it didn't work out because now his team's behind the 8 ball, and they are probably looking pretty demoralized because Nathan MacKinnon basically dad-dicked the shit out of them with that 1 goal where he walked around Nick Hague and absolutely roofed it over Lehner's glove side. And like, I don't want to criticize Lehner because, like, I mean, the guy was coming in completely cold. He hadn't played this entire playoff so far. We like everyone that follows hockey knows like his struggles as a person, like his mental health issues are very public. He has no problem being front facing about what he's going through at the time. And unfortunately, he had about as bad of a playoff debut as you can. Ironically, the day after they got completely destroyed, 2 days after they got destroyed, they announced the Vezina contenders, and Marc-Andre Fleury was nominated for the first time. So it's kind of like just an extra like salt in the wound to like Pete DeBoer, where it's like, you really thought benching Fleury was a good idea, huh? How's that working out for you? So yeah, just playoff chaos. I mean, think about it now. Even if the Leafs did beat Montreal, like maybe, yeah, sure, they'll get goalied again by Connor Hellebuck and the Jets go through, or maybe somehow Marner and Matthews figure it out. They actually start scoring at a better rate than Tyler Mott or Jay Beagle has over the last couple playoff series that they were in. Look that up because that's truth. Tyler Mott has more playoff goals in the last couple years than Mitchell Marner or Austin Matthews do combined. I believe that's what I read, which is like that great quote from John Tortorella. It's good for him, not great for us. Canucks fans love it, obviously, because that's just amazing. But if Toronto went through, they would get completely destroyed. Like, I'm sorry, like I was very polite and nice to Jack Campbell because, you know, what he's gone through to make it to where he is right now and, you know, fight for his team to get through the North Division playoffs. But you put Nathan MacKinnon, like for those that don't know, or maybe just like forget this because I do all the time, the Canadian division teams have not played any American teams once this year. So they have nothing to work off of. They have no clue what their systems are going to look like against American teams. It is a complete crapshoot. They have no idea. And the fact that the Leaf system struggled against the Habs and they could barely get to game 7 with the goaltending that they had, like if they won that game and they face off against Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Gabe Landeskog, like they're, oh my goodness, like it's just like it's sad. Like I think Jackson McDonald had like a great tweet about it where he's just like, let this game 7 be a reminder of just how bad the North Division is, because like, oh my god, when the number 1 seed is just getting completely clowned and offering absolutely nothing against a team that most people had as the losers of the series. Like TSN had that amazing graphic where it had posted all of the playoff picks for the Habs Leaf series by everyone, and the only writer or panelist or analyst or whatever that picked, or they didn't even pick the Habs, but they picked the series to go to 7 games, and he still had the Leafs as the winner. No one picked the Habs because they looked so fucking bad. So that's amazing. And yeah, it's just so much to take away from this game. Like even the aftermath, like the Leafs had gone all in to make this their run, and as they should, because it's the North Division, as I've said, it was like one of the worst divisions ever, which makes it all the funnier that they lost. But they gave up a first, they gave up second, a fourth, 2 fifths, and like a 6th and a 7th round pick across their next 2 drafts to acquire Nick Foligno, Riley Nash or something, and who am I forgetting? Oh, Ben Hutton. And Ben Hutton didn't even play. Nick Foligno played a couple games. Riley Nash played just enough games that it bumped up the condition on the 6th round pick to bump up to a 5th round pick. So they paid like an extra premium to lose, but the 7th game. So that's like really funny. Even after seeing like what they gave up to try and make it work, like a lot of people are like, oh, they're so screwed. Their cap situation is fucked. They don't have the assets. They're, this, that, and the other thing. But it's like what Toronto management team have you been watching over the last 5 years? This team has been fine navigating the cap that they have while it's allocating 30 mil to Tavares, Matthews, and Marner. Like they haven't had issues. They have made it work through the allocation of LTIR, through very creative trades where they were, basically picking up picks for acting as a mediator or like a intermediary to take on a percentage of someone else's cap hit. I think they did that with Robin Lehner actually when he was traded to Vegas. And that's all just to say that if there was any team that was going to figure out how to navigate this offseason, knowing that the cap probably isn't going up for another 5 years, it's going to be the Leafs. They only have 1, 2, 3 picks next year and 3 picks the following. And you know what? They're probably still going to end up with 4 more picks when all is said and done, because they're very good at finding draft capital, whether that's trading, a non-asset AHL player depth piece for another AHL depth piece, but taking something back in return. They have no problem doing that. They did it tons of times last year. Worked out. Cal Rosen, I think they traded originally for a pick and something, and then they like Cal Rosen, so they picked him back up again. Like they'll be fine. The people that are just like jumping on the hate train to say like how crappy the Leafs are, like they do need to kind of reel it back and be like, oh yeah, this management team like knows what they're doing. Lawrence Gilman has been getting away with amazing cap management and circumvention for his entire career as an executive in the NHL. He's going to make it work for Toronto. There's no doubt about that. They're going to find a way to re-sign Zach Hyman. Like they're going to make it work. It's like, stop freaking out. but yeah, anyways, the next series from that loss, that amazing, incredibly funny loss, is Montreal, Winnipeg. The series absolutely no one wanted, expected, or cares for. I grew up loving Timu Solani because it sounded like salami, and if you're looking at the YouTube screen, you can tell I am someone who likes processed meats. So it just made sense to like the Winnipeg Jets. Plus, their branding fucking rules. But I couldn't even tell you, as someone who grew up watching the team, if they have any semblance of a rivalry with Montreal. The only thing I know of is that the Jets traded away Joel Armia, Steve Mason, and like a 6th-round pick to try and make cap space for Paul Stastny to re-sign, and so they could have a second chance at going for playoffs. And Paul Stastny still said, "No, I'm good," and then fucked off to Vegas for 2 years. Which, oh man, I don't even want to get into it, but how mad I was at Paul Stastny, because Joel Armia, I'm sure as Montreal Canadiens fans know, is a very good player. He is a very adequate player. He can kill penalties. He, for some reason, has a innate ability to just provide multi-goal games out of nowhere for his team, even though he has no reason to, but he just does. The Armia of one was a tough loss for the Winnipeg Jets, more than I think they probably realized it would be. And of course, then they lose Stastny on top of it, so they basically gave up like a bunch to get nothing. They tried the Kevin Hayes all-in maneuver, even though that made no sense at the time and was pretty much a disaster the second they did it. They kind of got it back their ways when they traded away Laine. They got Dubois. Dubois really struggled with Winnipeg, but eventually they really got to hope that he can pull it together and become like a legit center for them. Because otherwise, then it's another oh fuck, we gave away Patrick Laine away for a guy who can't even play for us. That would be pretty awful. Not that it would really matter, because Patrick Laine doesn't look like he can play games for Columbus either. So it's it's a non-factor of a trade. But Stastny coming back gives the Jets some pretty credible depth, even though I don't think Stastny was necessarily that good against Edmonton. But against the Habs, I think it's a bit closer than we think. I'm pretty sure the Habs might actually win, though, barring the fact that Connor Hellebuck puts out 4 shutout performances in a row and Nick Ehlers pops off with Kyle Connor. But even then, that's a big ask. That's basically what Toronto asked from its players. They needed Jack Campbell to stand on his head, and they needed not only their depth to score, but they needed their top line to score, or their top 6 to score. And the top 6 didn't show up, so they had nothing going for them. The Jets are coming off of a giant layoff too, whereas the Habs are riding this wave of emotion from this big upset Game 7 victory. So I think Winnipeg's probably going to lose the first game, and it'll probably be a good fight. It'll be a good back and forth tussle, but it's largely going to come down to goaltending and whose third line produces more. That's pretty much all it's going to come down to. If Nick Ehlers regresses to what he was 2 years ago and just forgets how to score because he's had a week off, they're probably screwed. Blake Wheeler looks a bit older or takes another puck to the nuts, then yeah, they're probably pretty screwed again. Obviously, I hope the Jets win, but it really doesn't matter because, as I said, the winner faces likely Colorado. I can't imagine Vegas comes back from that embarrassment on Sunday. But yeah, it doesn't matter who I pick to win. They're just going to get completely steamrolled. I think even if Vegas came back in their series and somehow won, that wouldn't give me any faith that a North Division team could even take a game off of either team. They're just so bad. It's unbelievable. But yeah, that's about it for the Leafs Habs talk, and the North Division just embarrassing itself time and time and again. Next up, Vasily Podkolzin signs his ELC. This was rumored a bit like maybe a week ago from, I think Thomas Drance reported it, and he was kind of just like speculating like, oh, like I'm pretty sure they have a deal in principle and it's just like not being announced yet. They're waiting till after the Worlds is up. And then Jim Benning goes on the Donnie and Dolly show on Czech News, and Rick Dollywell like kind of like suckers Jim into answering the question in a way where he has to admit that he has signed Podkolzin. I think the actual phrasing was something like, so Jim, you have Vasily Podkolzin signed. When are you going to announce it? And Jim had like paused and was just kind of like, well, yeah, we're just going to wait until the Worlds are over. Like some kind of like non-answer where he basically had to admit that the deal was done. It doesn't matter. Like he was going to sign anyway. The kid was like basically spending the last 2 years telling everyone in the Canucks hockey market, the Canucks management crew, that, you know, he was going to come stateside. He had a pretty, you know, encouraging quote where he basically said, like, if it's the AHL, if that's what they want me to do for my development, like, so be it. Like, I want to make it in the NHL and I'm going to do whatever the team wants. So that's nice. Everything I've read and seen of Podkolzin tells me like he's going to be a pretty credible forward at the NHL level. Like at the World Juniors, like the guy was just like white on rice. Like he was unreal for that team. And I think one of the big issues that people had with like Niels Hoglander coming over from the SHL, they were like, oh, you know, he's got the offensive flash, he can score, he's got the dangles, all that. But like, what's he gonna do with on a smaller ice surface against bigger bodies? Like, is he gonna have that compete level to hang with like the big boys of the NHL? And it was kind of the inverse when he made the NHL, and Travis Green trusted him in a top 6 role with Bo Horvat and Tanner Pearson. He was fine with the compete with the bigger bodies and, you know, the battle level required to be an NHL player. That wasn't even his issue. He produced and provided a two-way game that was like unheard of for someone who a lot of people were like, don't get your hopes up if it doesn't work out and he has to go to the AHL. He kind of blew everyone away with the fact that he was able to maximize both parts of his game at a very high level. And yeah, like at the end of the season, most people were like, oh, you know, his two-way impact wasn't that great towards the end. Yeah, I mean, you look at the Canucks roster, no one's two-way impact was that great. Like everyone's shot control metrics were like terrible. Hoglander's expected goals for was like really good and really impressive. He had, I think he finished the season as the second best producer at 5-on-5, which for a rookie is like unbelievable, especially one that was basically trusted with like matchup minutes with like Bo Horvat. Like that's unreal. And so now you have Vasily Podkolzin coming in, and it's kind of like the inverse where Hoglander was, okay, he's got the offense. Does he have the other part? Vasily Podkolzin has the other part. No one's questioning his ability to compete, his two-way game, his ability to hound on pucks and like create plays. But just the question of, you know, where will he be able to produce at the NHL level if, you know, the KHL offense wasn't really there, which most, you know, scouts and people in the industry will tell you is because of a product of his line mates over in the KHL and his deployment. Like Chris Faber, like the crazy mustard eating watermelon man himself, would watch every single Podkolzin game in the KHL and would report on his ice time. And like the shift length was like, you know, he'd miss the second period, come out in the third, have a 44-second shift, would be benched for 7 minutes, and then come back, play a minute 20, and then was benched for the rest of the game. And that happened over and over and over again, even though in those like 6 minutes per night in the early goings of the season, he was rocking like a 78% Corsi 4, which for anyone that's listening to this, Corsi 4 is basically the number of shots at 5-on-5, so even strength, the number of shots that you as a player can generate, not individually, but maybe you set up or whatever, the on-ice shot attempts that occur with you on the ice versus the shot attempts against by the opposing team with you on the ice. Basically, if you're, playing 5 minutes and you outshoot your opponent 10-1 in those 5 minutes, then you're laughing because that means you're dominating them. Obviously, there's a bunch of factors to that, though. Like if that one shot against was a goal against, like your on-ice save percentage gets screwed with. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But the fact that he's rocking such a high Corsi 4 as a 19, 20-year-old in a men's league that is typically very hard on young players to break in and earn their spot, that's impressive. That's good. That's a good sign. And I hope they can maybe make a line of him, Horvat, and Hoglander work, because if you have Podkolzin winning the battles for Hoglander to set up Horvat, or vice versa, you have a very productive third line, second line, maybe. Tanner Pearson, he would be the Canucks are golden if Tanner Pearson is on their third line, because that means they have depth, which would be amazing to say, given the contract they just signed him to and the contracts they're probably going to have to dish out to try and field a competent team for the 2021-2022 season. So if Podkolzin comes in and generates chemistry with Hoglander and Horvat nearly immediately, that's good. The Canucks need that. They need all the depth they can get. Thomas Strantz and Harman Dial have been killing it at The Athletic lately. They just put out a couple pieces that basically outline how the depth that the Canucks have right now isn't nearly as good as people think it is. Their left wing depth, outside of Podkolzin making the jump to the NHL, is Mark Michaelis and Jonah Gadjevich. And I don't know if listeners of this program saw Jonah Gadjevich play. He didn't get really much of a look. He looked whatever. He didn't really stick out besides getting in a fight. And then after he got in his fight, Travis Green benched him, which is, I think I said this on the last program, it's something he's done before. He did that to Zach McEwen when Zach McEwen made his debut and got in a fight and he got benched for the rest of the game. It's this very weird, I don't play guys who get in fights in their debut. I don't know. It's very bizarre. I'll have to ask him if I ever run into him. What's the deal with scratching guys who fight for your players when they take a bad hit or whatever? What's the deal, man? But aside from that, the depth isn't really that great. The Canucks took some actions today on June 1st, because today was the cutoff date for when players are eligible for re-entry into the draft. So I think the rights expire or something like that if you do not sign 20-year-olds or something like that to their entry-level contracts. So the Canucks signed their 2019 sixth round pick, Karel Plasek, to his 3-year ELC. He's a soon-to-be 21-year-old who put up 10 points in 44 games in the Tier 1 Czech Men's League. I think most Canucks fans probably remember him from the most recent World Juniors. He stood out quite a bit in a couple of the games, and I think they were relying on him quite a bit because there was some injury concerns or COVID breakouts. I can't remember what the deal was, but I remember him sticking out in a good way at the World Juniors. The Canucks are very high on his two-way game, and his hockey IQ. His stats in the Czech league they don't really jump off the page. And for someone his age, you'd expect a bit more. I think Lukas Jasek, fellow Czech player and technically Canucks property at this moment, he hasn't been re-signed, but he had something like 28 points in 56 games played in the Czech men's league at the same age. Obviously, they might profile differently as players. There's COVID considerations that maybe the Czech league has taken on a bunch more talent, so his role might have been diminished a bit. But obviously, the Canucks are high on his upside. They wouldn't sign him otherwise. And he basically is trending to be the first member of the Abbotsford whatever you want to call them, as some forward depth. So that's kind of exciting because, I mean, outside of some of the NHL players who are, aging and probably tracking to not play in the NHL next year, we don't really know what that AHL team is going to look like whatsoever. So it's nice to get a little something. One of the players who will not sign with the Canucks, who actually did play for their farm team last year with the Comets in a brief 7-game stint, is fellow 2019 fourth round draft pick, Ethan Keppen. I guess Rick Dollywall reported that the Canucks weren't interested in re-signing him, so he's going to re-enter the draft. Just like a brief touch on Keppen, because obviously I tracked him a bit in Utica. His debut went about as bad as a pro debut could. A lot has been spoken about Keppen coming off of an injury-laden season, even before COVID shut down the OHL. So he had come into Utica basically not having played in something like 15 or 16 months, something like that. And when Trent Cull played him, I still can't really make sense of it, but they were playing against Providence Bruins, who are one of the top development teams in the AHL. And for whatever reason, this is their only game they played against them in the entire abbreviated AHL season. He deployed Keppen on a fourth line with St. Louis prospect, who's like kind of like an AHL fourth line penalty killing depth piece in Tanner Kaspick, and then an ECHL piece also signed to the Blues in Robbie Jackson, who had not played in 2 weeks at the time, or 2 weeks, or I think 2 weeks since 2 weeks prior to when he played his last game. So this line, who had never practiced together, hadn't played in weeks. Tanner Kaspick was like on his third game as a scratch, so like he too had been on a layoff. And they go out there, they are on the ice for 4 goals against at 5v5. Trent Cull elected to use Keppen like he was a second liner. He might have played 19 minutes total, almost exclusively at 5v5 or on the second unit power play. He got played way too much for a kid making his debut off of a giant layoff, and after pretty well coming in looking completely out of shape. Like, not saying like, he's not like a professional athlete, like he doesn't take care of himself, but just like in the sense that he clearly was coming into the season behind the 8 ball, because as expected, there wasn't a lot of ice time going around for guys to practice on. So he came in 15 months since his last like actual game action in the OHL. He's now adapting to AHL players, so likely fellow ECHL depth pieces, but some like legitimate 28-year-old like vets of the AHL. That's a big ask. It was a huge ask, and I kind of understand like where the Canucks are coming from. They have 22 contracts signed right now, and they can only have a maximum of 50. So there's 28 to go around. They've got to flesh out, an AHL team and an NHL team next season. So they might have been like, we don't want to invest the time. But in my opinion, you could have taken a flyer on Keppen. He's a big body, had pretty decent skating ability. Like, he didn't look out of place relative to the guys he was playing against. Like, he didn't look that bad. His passing looked sharp. He had pretty decent playmaking from what I saw, with, again, on a line with 2 guys who aren't exactly studs at the AHL level in a normal season. But yeah, it's just the fitness thing. And it's kind of crappy for him that he has to go back into a draft now, having played these 7 games where like he was pretty much behind the 8 ball, got tuned most of the time. His on-ice save percentage, or his on-ice metrics, weren't great. Like, he didn't control shot attempts. His on-ice save or shooting percentage was really low. The save percentage of his goalie was obviously atrociously low with him on the ice at 5v5. Like, basically nothing went right. I still would have taken the Flyer, though. Like, the Canucks do have to round out an AHL team. And as I said earlier, like, they need contingencies in the event that they cannot call up players from the ECHL due to cross-border restrictions or what have you. So if you have a bunch of prospects signed to their ELCs who are playing for you, like, even if Kepin is a 13th forward on an AHL team, that's still time to develop players. And that is the job of an AHL team, is to develop players. I've said, I don't know how many countless times on Twitter, on this podcast, on other podcasts, just like how poorly the Canucks have done at developing through the AHL. It still remains to be seen what happens with Jalen Chatfield, Ulevi, Rathbone, Gadjevich, Lynn, Lockwood. We have no idea. Even Zach McEwen to like a lesser extent, because he kind of fell out of favor with Travis Green this year. The number of players that have developed through the Utica Comet system and become everyday NHLers is looking like 1.5 to 2 guys right now. And one of them is their number one goaltender. So you can kind of strike that off the list, because goalies develop in a completely different way than skaters do. They work exclusively with goalie coaches. They aren't really privy to like the on ice like playmaking and stuff like that. They develop in a completely different way. And then after that, it's Zach McEwen and his 60 games played in the NHL, maybe a bit less. He had props to him. Like, he came out of the Quebec Major Junior League, undrafted free agent. The Canucks saw something in his size, his growth spurt. They thought maybe they could turn him into something, and credit to them, they basically did. They converted him from a center to a winger. They liked his speed, they liked his skill, his puck handling, and they turned him into a 13th, 14th forward on this current Canucks team. On a contending NHL team, I don't know if McEwen slides into the lineup. Same thing with Jalen Chatfield or Ulevi. Can you honestly say they would find a spot on the Toronto Maple Leafs, on the Canadiens, on the Avalanche? Like, no, they're in the NHL because the Canucks have nothing else. They couldn't afford anything else. They haven't developed anything else. So by default, they were given NHL roles regardless of whether they were ready or not. So a lot of people are like, oh, they made it. They've developed. Look at Ulevi. Look at Chatfield. They made it. And it's like, you got to throw the asterisk on there that they are only there for very specific reasons. And it isn't exactly complimentary to the team itself that the reason that these kids are making the NHL is because they've done such a terrible job fleshing out their defense, fleshing out their bottom six. Like, it's not a great look for them necessarily. But alas, the Canucks get a little bit of something. Maybe they get a top 9 forward in Podkolzin. Maybe, I don't know, Kepin re-enters the draft, and hopefully he doesn't end up on a Pacific Division AHL team and end up becoming something, because that would just be very... it would be really funny if Kepin actually got drafted by the St. Louis Blues because they liked what they saw of him with Utica, and then he ended up being something. That would just be amazingly funny. Frankly, it would be just another straw in the cap of funny Canuck shit that's happened over the last few years. But anyway, now on to the serious shit. If you are watching our YouTube channel, I have a little banner up next to my face. Unfortunately, my face is very blown up right now because Lachlan isn't here. So our, arrangement or whatever, our screen arrangement, our layout decides to zoom into my face as much as possible, even though that isn't necessarily the best, most optimal use of my image. And next to my disgusting, hairy face is a Indigenous artwork piece for Every Child Matters. If content warning, like what I'm going to be talking about for the next, I don't know, like half an hour or something like that, isn't really is tangentially related to hockey. I'm going to make it about hockey, even though it's mostly me just talking about my frustrations with the hockey ethos and one of the bigger news pieces that came out in the last week. For those of you that do not know or not yet aware, I understand, like, not a lot of people have cable, follow the news, whatever. But last Thursday, and sorry, if you're looking at the YouTube screen, you're going to see me reading because I wrote out pretty much everything I was going to say here because I didn't want to fumble on my words. I didn't want to come off disrespectful. I didn't want to accidentally say something that I don't mean or mispronounce something and come off like I'm intentionally, discrediting or being disrespectful. Like that's so. If you see me, my eyes darting left or right over and over again, like just know it's because I take this shit very seriously. This is a topic that is very close to me and has hit me a lot harder than I really expected it would have. So just bear with me while, I talk about something that's very serious. And if you are a Canadian, if you're an American, if you are any of our listeners from around the world, this should, matter to you as it matters to us as human beings. So if you weren't aware, last Thursday, using ground penetrating radar, a mass grave of 215 children, some as young as 3 years old, were found buried on site of the Kamloops residential school in Kamloops, Shiquapum First Nation. For those of you unaware, I am of Indigenous ancestry. My mom is a Capoeino Cree First Nations member. I think I've retweeted her story either myself or through my sister's account at Chanbing on Twitter, Canucks Twitter OG. So I've retweeted her story a few times, but I'll retell it here on the podcast. My mom was taken from her birth mother during the 60s scoops. And for those who also don't know what the 60s scoops is, as I didn't know up to 5 or 6 years ago, whenever that was, it was a government program, like a mandate that from the 50s into the late 80s and early 90s, that newborn Aboriginal children would be basically taken from their mothers, their families, and adopted out to predominantly white families in an effort to erase Indigenous culture through means of telling these predominantly white families to not tell their adopted children about their heritage, about where they come from, and to essentially raise them as white people and get them to not care about where they are coming from, who their families were, just atrocious genocide shit. My mom was very fortunate. She was adopted out to an incredibly affluent white family. My grandpa was a mechanical engineer who decided at 50 years old he would rather be a lawyer, went to UBC, got a law degree, and became a judge in Kamloops, where he eventually retired. My grandma was a registered nurse and raised 4 kids, 3 very white ones, and then my mom, who was very, very beautifully native. My mom lucked out. Her family loves her. They treasure and support her and were always beside her in her journey to discover her heritage. It was always, of course, very difficult because my grandparents, as one of these adoptive families, were advised by the adoption agency or whoever was in charge to never tell my mom about her heritage, where they got her, anything. Like literally nothing was allowed to be spoken to her. My grandma upheld this oath that she took with the adoption agency or whatever they were, Probably because she's an RN, she's used to oaths and stuff like that. My grandfather was a bit more, progressive and was a bit more upfront and honest about, my mom's heritage. But even then, the government, after so many decades of my mom wanting to know where she was from, what happened to the family that adopted her out, like through that journey, she discovered everything about the 60s scoops. She had no idea. I had no idea. Like my family had no idea. This was all news to us through like basically the research that my mom was doing to find out who her family was. It took like a decade for my mom to obtain the original adoption papers from the agency that basically just confirmed what her birth name was on her birth certificate. And even then, they gave her a name that wasn't actually the name that was given to her by her birth mom. There was a lot of redacted stuff, like blacked out bars, so she can find out, like, who the father was, who the mother was. Like, couldn't find the name, couldn't find what city she was born in. Like, it's as bare minimum, just like confirmation, like, yes, this woman was in fact born on this date around this year. Like, didn't even have the actual specific year. They just couldn't give a shit. They just wanted to get these kids away from their Aboriginal parents and into the arms of white saviors. So yeah, it was always heartbreaking because, my mom was a visible minority, like for her entire life, putting up with bullshit from people judging her for her skin color. She never understood it because, as far as she was concerned, she was just another kid born to an affluent, rich white family. She wanted to, and when she wanted to find her actual identity, the government denied her that right and that ability. It took another 10 years. So we're talking like 2016, 15 or something like that, when by somehow, I have no idea how she did this, but she managed to track down the band that she was adopted out from. And through contacting the people in charge of that band, she actually got in contact with her biological sister and, by extension, her biological mother. Her biological mother, so my biological grandmother, was a survivor of the Alberta residential school system. I've read and heard some of these stories like secondhand through my mom about what my biological grandmother was subjected to under these residential school systems, and it's shocking. It is genuinely atrocious information to find out. As I think I've said on this program before, like, I am not the most educated person. I am in hockey and in stats and analyst stuff because I just found an interest in it. But otherwise, like, I would have had no clue 10 years ago that I was ever going to do something related to numbers or math in my spare time. That would be just unheard of. Same thing as my First Nations heritage. I had no idea. When I was growing up, my mom was pretty upfront, like, that we are First Nations, but she could never confirm because the government would refuse to tell her where she was even from. So growing up, we were always just kind of told, well, you're from Alberta, or your mom's from Alberta, so you're probably just Cree. So go with that. So after all these years of just, thinking you're Cree, my mom went to my birth mother and was stunned, of course, that she was, one, alive, B, she had another biological sister who she'd found. This isn't even counting the fact that I'm not really too sure how this story happened, but she did make contact with her biological brother, who was also taken during the 60s scoops. But this was like decades ago, like when I was born type shit. I don't know how she pulled this off in the pre-internet age, but they did somehow. But anyways, my mom was rejected by her birth mother because she was perceived as being white. She was raised by an affluent white family, and the reconnection from my mom to my biological grandmother was seen as like a representation of all the trauma, the prejudice, the abuse that my biological grandmother faced while, just living in society, while going through the residential care system. So it wasn't some bittersweet reunion of like, oh my gosh, I found my daughter. It was, oh my God, this is what I've been through. This is the government laughing in my face, basically, because we tried to kill off your name, your family, and through sheer will of my mother, said, fuck you to the government. I'm going to find out where I belong and who I belong to, even if you're going to, step on my toes the entire way. So I have a lot of respect for my mother. She is strong. She's overcome a lot. Her biological mother's overcome shit I would not wish on my worst enemies. So yeah, you're probably wondering, like, okay, what does the story of these 215 children have to do with hockey? And it kind of doesn't, but I wanted to talk about this purely because we are, I think, a week and a half removed from the Edmonton Oilers getting knocked out of playoffs by the Winnipeg Jets. Upon that happening, Ethan Bear's girlfriend went public with social media posts saying, please stop making Indigenous racial comments, hate speech towards my boyfriend Ethan Bear simply because your hockey team lost. There's no place in our society, in hockey, wherever, for racist comments towards my boyfriend, who is, of course, a visible minority and proud member of the Cree First Nations, or I'm sorry, whichever one he belongs to. So that was only a week and a half ago. And after Ethan Bear's girlfriend came out with this, it was pretty much like pulling teeth to get any kind of reaction from not only the team that he belongs to, the Edmonton Oilers, but players in the league, the NHL, and fellow teams. It wasn't like this is something that's just going to happen overnight. Like, we obviously support our players. We support, anyone facing racial prejudice, and we condemn the awful comments that are being made, because at the end of the day, it's just a fucking game. It took, I think, 2 days or a day. I can't remember. It took basically a period of time that was way too long for Ethan Bear's captain and teammate, Connor McDavid, to just put out a statement that said, I'm with you, bro. Like it took a lot. And this is like atrocious shit being said at a kid for, playing a game and getting benched. Like, not even his fault. It's unbelievable. And so I was hurt that less than a week after this piss poor, pathetic reaction to what Ethan Bear was going through, we have basically a horrific event being brought to light that shines a very, very poor light on Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples across Canada. And to many people even on my timeline, who had no idea about, what residential schools were, what 60s scoops were, what horrors and trauma that were subjected to First Nations people purely because the government of Canada saw them as second-class citizens, not worthy of a place on this earth. So it hurt more that after one of the league's own is basically forced to publicly cry for help. I mean, it wasn't him, it was his girlfriend, but the fact that it took this public outcry to get support for one player, and not even a few days later, this horrific act is revealed that, like, let's be clear here, the Kamloops Shikwapam Nation had to pay to unearth these mass burials. Like, it wasn't just like the government of Canada was like, "Oh yeah, we got you. We'll do some sonar and radar to see what's out there." Like, no, the nation paid for this to happen. The only reason this happened is because First Nations groups across Canada have to spend their money to find resolution and closure on all of these children who were stolen from their families, forced into these death camps to be stripped of their ways of life so that they are not only hated by their families, but the society that they are forced to live in. And for this news to drop and see so many people just devastated, I was devastated, my mom was devastated, my sister's devastated, to see not one single team put out an outcry of support until 4 days later, when the Canucks, of all teams, put out a statement to extend their support. And I want to give quite a lot of credit to the Canucks in this moment, because they're notorious for being late on what the idiot public, as I like to call them, would perceive as social justice or cancel culture or whatever. They're late on every single major issue that's ever come up. Even when their players opted out of games so that they could protest against the violence happening in Minnesota after the George Floyd murder, they were late on putting out any kind of statement or support of Black Lives Matter, any of that. I don't even think they had a Pride night this year. Like, they are so bad at supporting the people that make up the majority of their fan base, First Nations people being one of them. And I have to credit them now for the statement that they put out, because they could have put out a very simple, feel-good statement that didn't really amount to much, just a bunch of empty platitudes that don't really matter. Because I will say, after reading the statement of the Canucks, I then saw the statement of the Winnipeg Jets, where they don't, like, the Winnipeg Jets, for those that don't know, are very in tune with the First Nations people that surround Manitoba. They have these wonderful, wonderful Aboriginal jerseys that they roll out like once a year. And I know you hear like once a year, like, what does that mean? Like, yeah, it's a work in progress, people. Their statement didn't even have what the Canucks had put in their statement, which I will read to you in full here. Tonight and going forward, Rogers Arena will be lit up orange to honor the 215 children found in Kamloops, as well as every other child who was forced to attend residential schools and their families. We acknowledge the genocide of the Indigenous community, and as Canadians, must do more towards real truth and reconciliation. That last sentence in there didn't need to be in there. When you think of a PR standpoint, you think of the BLM or the Black Lives Matters protests and the statements that were put out then. It took, I don't know, until like the 20th team to acknowledge that what happened to George Floyd was a murder. And there is obviously a racial injustice issue towards visible minorities in America that is a crisis. Not a lot of teams took that kind of stance. They just took a stance of what's going on sucks. Everyone should be treated equally. That kind of very generic phrasing. The Canucks put in this phrase, and I could not believe it, because they were the first team, so they could have put out the most basic bitch statement imaginable if they really wanted. But they put out a statement that said, we acknowledge the genocide of the Indigenous community. That's a powerful statement to to people that have been marginalized, ostracized by their society, thanks to the government that has spent the better part of 524 something years trying to eliminate them from their society. So to see the Canucks do that was huge. Obviously, lighting up the arena orange is like, step one of like what they actually need to do. I appreciated the fact that they said they need, as Canadians, we need to do more about truth, real truth and reconciliation. And I agree with that. There's so much more that needs to be done beyond just, lowering the flags to half mast and, lighting the arena orange. They're first steps, but realistically, there's a lot more that can be done. So I wrote down a few things, basically just kind of covering like what real truth and reconciliation would actually mean. Because there wasn't really like concrete steps, and like obviously like these statements don't really ever have to have concrete steps, but they just need to kind of acknowledge that they, are on their way to figuring out what they're going to do. On top of the statement that was made by the Vancouver Canucks, the Habs and the Leafs actually put out statements themselves about what had happened, and they started Game 7 with a moment of silence to honor the 215 lives that had been found. Immediately following that moment of silence, they immediately played the Canadian national anthem, which, if you do not know, the writers of the national anthem were basically racists who were white supremacists and viewed Canada as a state that should be run and operated by predominantly white men. And so it's a bit comical to follow up this, this moment of honoring someone with a song that is basically written about people that are glad they are dead and died the way they died. Like, that's so fucked up, and it speaks to like the lack of education of sports teams, sports franchises, sports leagues, people in general in Canada. Like, I'll get into this in a bit, but it's very just like eye rolling to play an anthem that fetishizes the government that spent the better part of its existence trying to erase the very existence of the people that the Jets and the Habs just tried to honor previously with their moment of silence. Like even right now, the current government of Canada, led by Justin Trudeau, is literally fighting residential school survivors in court on a daily basis over how much money they should pay them out. Like, it's baffling. And I'm sorry if anyone listening to this had this like rainbow idyllic view of what the Canadian government is and what Canada stands for. But unfortunately, as this news story probably revealed to you and people close to you, is that Canada is not free of atrocities or genocide. They have been executing one, and it still goes on today against the First Nations and Indigenous people of Canada. So what can the Vancouver Canucks do? What can NHL teams in prominent positions across Canada do to actually execute or implement concrete change or truth or actions that speak towards finding truth and reconciliation that supports First Nations people? Because lighting up a Rogers Arena, that's step one. Step one, would have been when they started instituting and mandating land acknowledgements at the beginning of every single game. Like, that's a pretty big step. Like, of all things, like, I would not have expected them to ever do that because, like, yeah, it's unceded territory. Like, why would this mega billionaire who makes his fortune off of appropriating land for farming wine, why is he going to acknowledge that he's living on unceded territory? Like, it's a big step for old Aquaman. So kudos to him on that, as much as I hate to give kudos. But the lighting up a Rogers Arena, like, if you have that lit orange for the next 215 years, like that wouldn't even cover the amount of years lost in just those 215 children that they were found. Like not even close. Like think about it. 215. That's a lot of years lost for absolutely nothing other than hatred. It's horrendous. I saw the Canucks for Kid Fund had tweeted out support for the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, which is actually located in North Vancouver. So like there's potential to grow that relationship even further if you're the Vancouver Canucks. I would suggest, and I feel like I've suggested this even in previous seasons, that the Canucks do an awful job of engaging with the First Nations people that are even in BC or the Lower Mainland. So I don't see why providing like an orange jersey night where they wear an orange alternate jersey that supports, Indigenous children, Indigenous peoples across Canada. They auction it off, and the funds go to, the IRSS to support, survivors of these atrocious residential schools that littered Canada up until the, mid to late 90s. Like that's the thing, is like they didn't just like stop in the 70s. And listening to a lot of people say like, oh, this is such a black mark in Canada's history. It's like, this is like a couple of years ago. Like most of the people I know were alive for this, barring like child cousins and nieces and nephews of mine. This is not old ways or anything. This is brand new shit. This has been around. It is a genocide that has been executed for 500 something plus years, and it hasn't slowed down. I will get into some of those figures supporting this in a bit. But on top of the orange jerseys, which is like a complete shoe-in, Canucks fans love jerseys more than anyone. The hubbub that followed the third alternate jerseys, the revamped flying skate, the revamped stick and rink. People love rebranded jerseys. Throw an orange one in the rotation to show your support of the indigenous peoples of not only Canada, but BC as well. That is super easy to do. They should be engaging with the actual Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I will drop some links in the tweet thread that's going to follow when I post this episode. But for a team that has as much pull as they do, we saw the reaction to them simply saying, we condemn the genocide of the indigenous people. They have a lot of pull. That's a lot of views. That's like millions and millions of followers of this team seeing a team publicly support a group of people that have been marginalized by society due to their government's inaction or willing, hatred of these people. I mean, it'll never happen. But if the Vancouver Canucks, I mean, it's probably not going to happen with the Italian Canadian owners, but if they actually condemned and demanded apologies and reparations from the Catholic Church on behalf of the peoples that support their team and therefore they support, that would probably be the most impactful thing that could come out of this entire situation. It would be incredible. I don't think it'll never happen, just because I know, but if they did, that would be the most impactful thing an NHL team has ever done for a marginalized people, possibly in the history of the NHL. They can be calling upon federal, provincial, and territorial governments to mandate education and revise curriculum that actually explains to the youth of today what residential schools were, what the 60s scoops were, what the actual history of Indigenous peoples in Canada are. Because, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I was in grade school, they didn't really teach you a whole lot about Indigenous peoples or First Nations people, as it was called back then. They taught you how the people used to weave baskets in the 1700s to catch fish, where the Haida Gwaii were located, and this is what their artwork looks like. And then they'd take you on a field trip to Emily Carr and show you some of the art left by, X artists here and there. That's about it. There was no, here's current relations. Even up into grade 12, they did not touch that shit with a 10-foot pole. Canucks, or any NHL team for that matter, could really make a difference here by actually mandating that the government institutions collaborate with Aboriginal leaders, educators, on providing a curriculum to students that best explains this in a touchy way, because obviously you can't tell a kindergartner oh, here's what a genocide is. But at the very least, they should be supporting and encouraging our governments to engage with Aboriginal leaders so that something positive can come from an education standpoint, because there is obviously a clear lack of it in our nation when it comes to what's really gone on with Indigenous people in our society. And then the last thing I would suggest is to promote some sort of internship or public hiring to a senior leadership position that utilizes or incorporates Indigenous persons. It's not that hard. You can, like I said, internships are free. They cost nothing. It's free PR. And it shows a large majority of your fan base who are of First Nations ancestry that there is equitable access to leadership roles within your organization, and therefore the NHL and other teams in this league. Because right now, it's kind of an uncomfortable topic, but you don't really get far if you are not a white man in the NHL or in any of their teams. Lately, there's been a surge in hirings of women. Shout out to the Toronto Maple Leafs, who promoted Haley Wickenheiser and I think Megan Dugan to player development roles. That's a big step. There's obviously still way more to go. And I wanted to talk about this other piece and how it relates to providing equitable access to leadership positions for Indigenous peoples in Canada, because on top of the Ethan Bear situation, there was another Indigenous related issue in a documentary aired by TSN called The Unwanted Visitor, which was about a former Jack Adams Award winner and former NHL head coach Ted Nolan. For those that don't know, Ted Nolan is a Cree First Nations person from, I think Ojibwe. That's pretty bad. I don't know. I should have written it down. He's from Ottawa, Ontario, or Oshawa, or whatever, Ontario. And he broke into the league as a coach for the QMJHL and then jumped to Buffalo and I believe Rochester. As coach of the Buffalo Sabres, he won the Jack Adams Award in his second year. And then after a GM change and a contract dispute, he wasn't picked up. He then basically didn't work in the NHL for another 5 or 10 years when he then got hired by the New York Islanders, where he was a head coach for 2 years, coached just fine. Then he coached for the Rochester Americans for 2 years or 2 seasons. Then he vanished again for another something like 10 years, and then coached the Buffalo Sabres when they were in full tank mode in 2014, 2015. And he hasn't been able to land an NHL head coaching job since. Nolan had some very interesting quotes because, of course, given this story that recently came out with Ethan Bear, people, of course, reached out to him because he had just had this documentary basically detailing how he feels he was slighted and prevented from ever landing himself full-time in the quote-unquote old boys club because of the color of his skin. He was asked about the racism that Ethan Bear faced, and he had some very telling quotes when it comes to this topic and why I feel that promoting Indigenous persons into positions of leadership is so important. And I'll read these quotes from him. You look at the hiring practices in this league, it's almost like you recycle all the time because those are the guys you grew up with. Those are the friends you have, and that's your comfort zone. When I got let go, not one team called me up and said, "Do you want to be an assistant coach? Do you want to be a scout? We'd love to have you." No one called. It's extremely tough when you have to go through that. So hopefully we'll have some trailblazers who will be hired into management positions so they can get more out of when they can get more out of our people to scout, manage, and be a part of this great game. So think about it. Ted Nolan was the trailblazer for Indigenous persons in leadership positions in the NHL. He won a fucking Jack Adams in his second year with the Buffalo Sabres. And here he is, like 15 to 20 years later, appealing to the powers that be in the NHL to be more inclusive and allow Aboriginal members of society to thrive and ascend to leadership positions, to blaze a trail for the next generation of Aboriginal and First Nations people who are looking at the NHL, the league that it is, and hoping they see a place where they can carve out a way, find a place for them that, like, in a society that has tried for so long to keep them out. Like, it shouldn't be that hard for a team like the Vancouver Canucks, who are creating a farm team from scratch, to hire a Ted Nolan to an assistant coach position. You want to curry favor to people that you're trying to support and encourage, hire Ted Nolan in an associate coach position for your AHL club and make him and another First Nations member who's a part of your organization in Rhonda Lorme as chairman of a group of people that mean to find and identify Aboriginal peoples that are looking to make their mark in hockey and start them out in internships or business roles or whatever in the AHL position, the AHL team that you've just started from scratch. That's a huge win. It's an easy win. And it would tie up a bow on a topic of conversation that was brought up in that documentary that pretty much was swept under the rug after everyone went, "Oh, that sucks. I always thought he was an okay coach." Oh, well, the conversation is back on. And I mean, the Ted Nolan story is like the second story of, I don't even know, like 3 or 4 that happened this year. And the last one that I want to get into, which is probably the most apparent and visible to Canucks fans, was the start of this season when new goaltender, their backup, Braden Holtby, wanted to do a nice deed by honoring the Aboriginal communities of BC with a mask inspired by Aboriginal artwork. Unfortunately, the artist that Braden Holtby chose was Swedish artist Dave Gunnarsson, who did not consult with any Aboriginal artist in BC before releasing the design that he had set up for Holtby's mask. People, myself included, were irked and kind of questioned the oversight, but reasonably understood that Holtby's heart was in the right place. He was trying to do something very honorable and meaningful to the community by honoring them in such a way. He just forgot, like, okay, I should probably, involve the people I'm trying to honor instead of exporting it to like my usual mask guy. So Holtby issued an apology after this, of course, and he's like, "This is a learning experience. Like, I had no idea about like the culture appropriation issue that was at hand, and I should have consulted with Aboriginal artists on this specific mask design. A new one will be coming out this year." A new one did come out later that year with a collaboration between Dave Gunnarsson and I think name escapes me, but I believe it was Andrews or something. But mask looked great. It's beautiful. Really props to Holtby for the way that he handled the entire situation. Unfortunately, there was a vocal minority on social media platforms that jumped to jump and say that people who were irked by the oversight, people like myself, were whiners or proprietors of cancel culture because we, God forbid, would want to include the Aboriginal people that Braden Holtby was trying to honor. The news of the 215 kids that were found in that mass grave should be a shock to a lot of these people who don't understand why the issue of cultural appropriation is so big to Indigenous communities. For years, decades, centuries, the Canadian government has done everything in its power to drain the culture away from Indigenous people and destroy a way of life so that any Indian born would be no longer a problem to them. As Sir John A. Macdonald put it, we need to find a way to solve the Indian problem. That's what they were. The people were a second-class citizen, and a lot of the people that saw the issue or couldn't see the issue in Braden Holtby's mask appropriation had no idea that residential schools exist. They had no idea that, the 60 scoops were a thing. They had no idea that fuck, I mean, how many people have died? 215 were found at a school site meant to take care of these kids, and that probably accounts for maybe 5% of the actual number of kids that died trying to escape, that were buried in unmarked graves on the campuses, that were thrown into furnaces because they were born of rape from the priests and teachers at these schools that fucking loathe the people they were charged with taking care of. These people that had an issue with that mask, they didn't know any of this. And I hope, for the love of God, that the Vancouver Canucks keep up with their actual plan of upholding truth and reconciliation so that this conversation is continued to be driven. Because it can't just die with the arena being lit up and we wait another 6 months for another unmarked grave to be found by sonar. That isn't acceptable to me, and it shouldn't be acceptable to you as Canadian or American citizens. The education needs to be done. And I don't say this as someone who is, coming off his high horse like, oh, well, I knew this all along, because I didn't. I learned this shit as my mom learned it in her journey of figuring out her heritage. So I am just as green about this as you guys. And if I can take interest in wanting to find out more about these people who were wronged so poorly by our government, then you should too. You really should. I don't see how you could read that story about 215 kids being mass murdered and left in a fucking pit and not be wanting more from your government to take care of these people. Would you not want them to take care of you better than they were? Really? So anyway, I don't want to go on too long because I'm sure most of you have checked out by now. But obviously there are ties to hockey, and a team as prominent as Vancouver does have a chance here to really impact the community that has been so hurt by this news, so devastated by this news. They should be encouraging a completely revamped education system so that the Braden Holtby mass situation doesn't happen, so that racist comments to Ethan Bear don't happen because he was benched in a fucking game that his dog shit team couldn't win. Ethan Bear was not the problem in that series, okay? So any of those idiots throwing fucking racist comments towards him can, bury their heads in the sand or some shit. But anyways, Ted Nolan, he shouldn't be blackballed from a coaching community because of the color of his skin. He obviously has the chops. He won an award for it. Unless that was some kind of, let's just give it to the minority so that we look good for ourselves, which, I mean, knowing the NHL, that's probably pretty possible, but it shouldn't be the norm. Let's empower the visible minorities of our community. Let's support Indigenous cultures of Canada. Let's not let them die out on the vine because the government is done with them. I'm not done with them, and you guys shouldn't be either. I am sorry if any of this conversation has made you uncomfortable. I'm sorry if any of my terminology or phrasing offended any Indigenous or Aboriginal persons listening to this. It's not my intention. I am speaking mostly off the cuff, and so I'm apologies if my demonyms are, phrasing isn't, top notch, but I'm speaking off the cuff and very upset, and it's just shit that's going to happen. But before I leave you with this very bizarre solo episode that I'm sure you were not expecting, I was going to leave you with some facts for anyone who hears me say that the genocide is still ongoing and thinks I'm full of shit. These are some facts from my mother that she had gained through her time, her research, and her talking with the people that she knows at her band at the Capoeira Nation in Alberta. 4.9% of Canada's total population are Indigenous. Indigenous children account for 52% of the total number of Canadian children in the foster care system presently. Indigenous women incarcerated account for 42% of the women in the women's prison system. 42%. Indigenous men, women, and teenagers account for over 30% of Canada's total incarcerated persons. Indigenous children stolen from their mothers during the 60s scoop is estimated conservatively right now at 35,000 people. Indigenous children death in residential schools is conservatively estimated right now at 4,100. And with these 215, I'm sure there are countless more to come. Again, apologies if this was tough to read or tough to listen to, but someone needed to talk about it. I am sorry it was me and not someone more eloquent. Not all of us can be Vyas Saran from Roxy Fever, because that guy is I love that guy, and the way he's able to talk about very difficult subjects amazes me. Thanks for listening to this pod. You can support our pod on a Patreon. We have $1 tiers and $5 tiers, and don't forget to like and subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcasting service, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, what have it. Drop us a 5-star review. Give us, all the love that we can get so that we end up on the charts somehow. I think we're number 7 in UK or Wales or something. I don't know how, but shout out to you, that one guy in Wales. We appreciate you, buddy. But yeah, thanks for your support. I'll catch you probably on Friday when Lachlan's gets settled in San Jose. But until then, folks, enjoy the playoffs, and thanks for listening. Bye.